Blood-red sunset over the Middle Eastern desert. Anti-aircraft fire split the sky like deadly fireworks, tearing through the darkness with venomous light. The SEAL team huddled behind crumbling concrete, calling desperately for air support. A gruff voice crackled through the radio. "She won't do it!" No pilots crazy enough to dive into that hellstorm. 8 warriors fell silent, death closing in from all sides. Then that familiar sound, the twin engines of an A-10 Warthog thundering through the smoke. In the cockpit, a female pilot, face cold as steel, pushing her aircraft below safe altitude. Have you ever doubted someone's courage, only to be silenced forever by a single act of heroism? Lieutenant Sarah Collins was 29 years old. Blonde hair pulled back in regulation style, steel gray eyes that had seen too much doubt from people who should have known better. For 18 months, she'd been the only female pilot in the 354 Fighter Squadron's A-10 division. And for 18 months, she'd endured the whispered nickname that followed her through every briefing, every mission, every moment of her military career. Ground hugger. It wasn't meant as a compliment. In the close air support community, it branded you as someone who flew scared, who stayed too high, who chose safety over effectiveness. The kind of pilot who'd rather protect herself than the troops counting on her. The SEALs were more direct in their assessments. Staff Sergeant Martinez had been brutally honest after her last support mission. Collins flies like she's afraid of her own shadow. All altitude, no attitude. When the shooting starts, she disappears into the clouds. Captain Rodriguez, her squadron leader, wasn't much kinder during performance reviews. "Sarah, you're technically proficient, but warfare isn't a textbook exercise. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty. Until you're willing to take risks, you'll never be more than adequate." The male pilots in her squadron had it easier. When Lieutenant Jackson pulled high-G maneuvers that bent aircraft beyond design limits, he was aggressive and fearless. When Captain Thompson violated minimum engagement altitudes to save trapped Marines, he earned medals and respect. But when Sarah Collins followed every regulation, maintained proper safety margins, and brought her aircraft home intact mission after mission, she was cautious and predictable. The base dynamics were always the same. In the officers' club, stories flowed about Thompson's latest death-defying run or Jackson's impossible shot through a mountain pass. Sarah would sit at the bar's edge, nursing a single beer, listening to legends being born around pilots who looked nothing like her. The exclusion wasn't malicious, it was worse. It was dismissive. The kind of professional isolation that comes from being perpetually underestimated, constantly having to prove worth that should have been assumed. When briefings assigned close air support missions, Sarah consistently drew the backup role. Primary support went to pilots with proven track records under fire. She got the secondary assignments: reconnaissance flights, cargo escort, routine patrols where nothing was expected to happen. The morning everything changed started like every other mission briefing. 8 SEALs preparing for a high-value target extraction in hostile territory. Primary close air support assigned to Thompson and Jackson. Collins relegated to standby status, military speak for sitting on the bench. "Collins, you'll maintain orbit at 15,000 feet, Squadron Leader Hayes announced. "If the primary assets need backup, you'll provide reconnaissance and coordination." Standard oversight role. The laughter was quiet but audible. Not mean-spirited, just the casual dismissal that had become her professional soundtrack. Martinez caught her eye as the briefing ended, his expression carrying the weight of honest assessment. "No offense, Lieutenant, but I hope we don't need you today. When bullets start flying, we need pilots who'll get their hands dirty." Sarah nodded professionally, filed the comment away with hundreds of others, and focused on her pre-flight checklist. But something was building inside her. 18 months of doubt, dismissal, and diminished expectations crystallizing into determination. As she walked toward her A-10, Crew Chief Peterson called out with his usual mix of respect and concern, "Fly safe today, ma'am. Bring her home in one piece." Sarah paused at the aircraft's nose, running her hand along the painted teeth that gave the Warthog its fearsome appearance. "Peterson, what did my father used to say about courage?" The older man smiled, remembering. "Colonel Collins always said courage wasn't about not being scared. It was about doing what needed to be done when everyone else said it was impossible." Sarah climbed into her cockpit, strapped in, and began her startup procedures. Today felt different. Today carried the weight of 18 months of proving herself, and she had the distinct feeling that weight was about to become either validation or career suicide. Where are you watching from? If you were in this situation, what would your first emotion be? Share this and subscribe to continue the story. The mission went sideways in the first 10 minutes. Intelligence had been wrong. Again. What should have been a simple extraction had turned into a coordinated ambush, with 8 SEALs pinned in a courtyard surrounded by enemy positions they'd never detected. Martinez's voice crackled through the radio, stripped of all military composure. "Overlord, we need immediate close air support. We're taking fire from 3 directions and running low on ammunition." Thompson's A-10 was first on station, circling at 8,000 feet while studying the tactical situation through his targeting pod. What he saw made his stomach drop. The SEALs were trapped in a killing field, with enemy machine gun nests positioned in a perfect triangle around their position. "Groundhog, this is Thunder 1. Target area is too hot for precision strikes. Enemy positions are within danger close range of your team." Jackson's aircraft arrived minutes later, adding his assessment to Thompson's. "Thunder 2 confirms. We can't engage without significant risk to friendlies. Recommend you find alternative extraction routes." But there were no alternative routes. The SEALs were surrounded, outnumbered, and rapidly running out of options. Martinez's voice carried the edge of desperation. "Thunder Flight, if you can't help us, we're dead in 5 minutes. They're massing for final assault." That's when Sarah's voice cut through the radio static. "Overlord Angel 27 requesting permission to engage." The pause that followed carried 18 months of doubt compressed into radio silence. Squadron Leader Hayes finally responded, "Angel 27, maintain standby position. Thunder Flight has tactical control." But Thompson was already shaking his head, studying the impossible geometry of the engagement through his scope. "Negative, Overlord. This target set requires precision we can't deliver from safe altitude. Minimum engagement range puts us too close to friendly forces." Sarah had been orbiting at 15,000 feet, watching the tactical picture develop with growing urgency. Through her own targeting system, she could see what Thompson and Jackson were seeing, and something they weren't. The enemy positions weren't random. They were carefully coordinated, designed to create overlapping fields of fire that made conventional attack runs impossible. But there was a gap, a narrow corridor that would require diving below minimum safe altitude, flying through concentrated anti-aircraft fire, and making weapon releases at ranges that violated every safety protocol she'd ever learned. "Overlord Angel 27 has tactical solution. Request permission to engage." Hayes' voice carried authority and concern. "Angel 27, explain your tactical solution." Sarah's mouth went dry, but her voice remained steady. "Single pass attack run. Diving approach through the eastern corridor. Engagement altitude 200 feet. Weapon release at point-blank range." The radio fell silent. 200 feet was barely above ground level, well below minimum safe engagement altitude for the A-10's 30mm cannon. At that altitude in contested airspace, survival rates approached 0. Thompson's voice crackled with disbelief. "Angel 27, that's a suicide run. No pilot makes that shot and lives." But Martinez's voice cut through the tactical discussion with raw desperation. "I don't care what altitude she flies. We need help now, or 8 Americans die in this courtyard." Sarah closed her eyes for 1 second, remembering her father's words from childhood. "Real courage isn't about not being scared, Sarah. It's about doing what everyone says you can't do when people's lives depend on it." She opened her eyes and keyed her radio. "Overlord, Angel 27 is commencing attack run." "Negative, Angel 27. Abort your approach. That altitude is..." Sarah switched to tactical frequency, cutting off the command channel. Below her, 8 SEALs were about to die because 3 pilots couldn't find the courage to break regulations. Today, she decided, regulations would bend to necessity. Her A-10 rolled inverted and dove toward Earth like a predator finally unleashed. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 10,000 feet, 5,000, 3,000, 2,000. Numbers that represented the difference between safety and salvation. Anti-aircraft fire erupted around her aircraft, tracers creating a light show of death that illuminated her cockpit in strobing patterns. Warning systems screamed alerts about surface-to-air missiles, radar locks, and imminent impact. Through her canopy, Sarah could see individual enemy soldiers pointing weapons skyward, muzzle flashes like camera bulbs capturing the moment she committed to a choice that would either save 8 lives or end 9. 1,000 feet, 800, 600. Her hands were steady on the controls, but her heart hammered against her ribs as physics and courage converged at terminal velocity. In the distance, she could see the SEAL position, a small cluster of American warriors depending on her to be better than possible. 400 feet, 300. Sarah's targeting system locked onto the first machine gun nest. Her finger moved to the trigger, and 18 months of doubt compressed into a single moment of absolute clarity. 200 feet. GAU-8 cannon armed and ready. If you were on that battlefield, would you trust her to dive down or give up? Comment your answer. At 200 feet above ground level, Sarah Collins entered a realm where physics and courage intersected in ways that flight manuals never described. Her A-10 knifed through the anti-aircraft fire like a missile with wings, diving at an angle that made survival mathematically improbable. The world compressed into a tunnel of calculation and violence. Wind resistance, target acquisition, bullet trajectory, everything had to be perfect because there would be no second chance at this altitude. Through her heads-up display, Sarah watched the first machine gun nest grow larger in her crosshairs. The enemy gunner was tracking her descent, adjusting his aim, preparing to cut her aircraft apart with concentrated fire. She reached the point where physics demanded a decision. Pull up now and live, or continue diving and discover whether courage could overcome mathematics. Sarah's finger found the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger erupted with a sound like the world being torn in half. 70 rounds of 30mm death hammered into the enemy position in exactly 1.7 seconds, vaporizing concrete, steel, and everything behind it. The recoil was so violent it actually slowed her aircraft, giving her precious milliseconds to acquire the second target. But she was still diving, still below safe altitude, still in the zone where one moment of inattention meant impact. Her targeting system swiveled to the second machine gun nest as tracer fire streamed past her canopy like deadly Christmas lights. The enemy gunner had her range now, bullets impacting her armor with sounds like hammers on anvils. Sarah's aircraft shuddered under the impacts, warning lights cascading across her instrument panel, but her hands remained steady on the controls. This was the moment 18 months of doubt had prepared her for. The instant when being underestimated became a weapon. BRRRRT. The second burst eliminated the eastern gun position, 150 feet. She was now flying below the height of most radio towers, threading her aircraft through a maze of ground fire at speeds that turned reaction time into academic concepts. The third target was different, a rocket-propelled grenade team that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Sarah could see the RPG gunner adjusting his aim, preparing to end her dive with a single well-placed shot. But Sarah had studied this target for 10 minutes from altitude, calculating angles and timing with the precision that had made her squadron mates dismiss her as too cautious. Now that caution became lethal accuracy. She triggered her third burst while banking hard left, using the A-10's legendary durability to absorb small arms fire while delivering devastating punishment to enemy positions. The RPG position disappeared in a cloud of concrete dust and twisted metal. Below her, the 8 SEALs pressed against whatever cover they could find, watching in disbelief as their backup pilot systematically dismantled the ambush that had pinned them down. Martinez keyed his radio, his voice barely audible over the sound of Sarah's engines. Jesus Christ, she's actually doing it. But Sarah wasn't done. The most dangerous target remained, a sniper in an elevated position who'd been picking off any SEAL who showed movement. He was protected by thick concrete, positioned at an angle that made him nearly impossible to engage with conventional tactics. Nearly impossible. Sarah rolled her aircraft inverted and dove straight down, using gravity and audacity to achieve an attack angle that shouldn't have been possible. Upside down, flying at treetop level, she aligned her cannon with surgical precision. The world rotated around her as G-forces tried to crush her into unconsciousness. Blood pooled in her head, her vision tunneled, and every instrument in her cockpit screamed warnings about structural stress and imminent catastrophe. But her finger remained steady on the trigger. B, R, T. The final burst silenced the sniper's position forever. Sarah yanked back on the stick with every ounce of strength in her body, pulling nearly 9 Gs as she clawed for altitude. The A-10 groaned like a wounded animal, wings flexing beyond design limits, but responding to her demands with the reliability that made the aircraft legendary. She leveled off at 500 feet, still dangerously low, but no longer flirting with impact, and keyed her radio with a voice that somehow remained steady despite what she'd just accomplished. Groundhog, this is Angel 27. Target area secure. You are clear for extraction. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then Martinez's voice, shaky with something between gratitude and awe. Angel 27, what you just did was impossible. Sarah looked at her instrument panel, noting the battle damage, the warning lights, the systems operating beyond their specifications. Her aircraft had taken dozens of hits but remained flyable, a testament to both engineering and luck. Negative, groundhog, just improbable. As she climbed towards safer altitude, Sarah could see the battlefield below transforming from a kill zone into a rescue site. The 8 SEALs were moving freely for the first time in an hour, calling for extraction, alive because someone had finally been willing to fly below safe altitude. Thompson's voice crackled through the radio. Angel 27, how did you make those shots? That dive was beyond anything in the manual. Sarah touched her father's dog tags, hanging inside her flight suit where regulations said they shouldn't be. Colonel Collins had worn them through 3 combat tours, carrying them right up until the day he'd made his own choice between regulations and lives. Thunder 1, some things don't fit in manuals. They just fit in moments when people need you to be better than possible. Type 1 word for her in the comments. Just 1 word. Mine is fearless. What's yours? The battlefield fell into an eerie calm as dust settled from Sarah's devastating attack run. 8 SEALs emerged from cover like ghosts materializing from smoke, their faces blackened with cordite and grime, but their eyes focused skyward with something approaching reverence. Martinez was the first to key his radio, his voice carrying 20 years of combat experience. Angel 27, you just saved 20 lives. But it was the silence that followed that spoke loudest. For 30 seconds, professional warriors who'd seen everything war could offer simply stared at the sky, processing what they'd witnessed. A pilot they dismissed as groundhugger had just completed an attack run that would be analyzed in flight schools for decades. Squadron leader Hayes's voice crackled through the command frequency, carefully controlled, but carrying undertones of disbelief. Angel 27, return to base immediately for debrief, and Sarah, nice flying. It was the first time in 18 months he'd used her first name over the radio. As Sarah's damaged A-10 limped toward home station, trailing smoke from multiple hits but still airworthy, the extraction helicopter touched down in the courtyard she'd just cleared. The SEALs moved toward it with the fluid efficiency of professionals, but every few steps, one of them would glance skyward, tracking her aircraft's progress across the desert sky. Back at base, word spread with the peculiar speed that military legends acquire, not through official channels, those would remain classified for years, but through the informal networks that connect warriors across specialties and branches. The crew chief working Sarah's post-flight inspection counted 47 bullet holes in her fuselage, 8 in her left wing, and shrapnel damage to both engines. By engineering calculations, the aircraft should have been unflyable after the first burst of ground fire. Ma'am, he said as Sarah completed her shutdown procedures, I've been working A-10s for 15 years. I've never seen battle damage like this on a bird that made it home. Sarah climbed down from her cockpit, legs unsteady from adrenaline dump, and walked around her aircraft with professional detachment. But her hands trembled slightly as she ran them along bullet holes that had missed vital systems by inches. The flight line fell quiet as she completed her inspection. Other pilots, ground crew, even administrative personnel had gathered to see the aircraft that had survived the impossible. But nobody spoke. The A-10 bore witness to something beyond normal military experience. Colonel Hayes arrived as Sarah finished documenting battle damage, approaching with the careful demeanor of a commander reassessing assumptions he'd held for years. "Lieutenant Collins, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. What made you think you could make that dive?" Sarah looked at her commanding officer, the man who'd relegated her to backup status for 18 months, and gave him the honesty he'd requested. "Sir, I never thought I could make it. I thought there was a reasonable chance I'd die in the attempt." "Then why did you do it?" "Because 8 Americans were going to die if I didn't try. And I decided their lives were worth more than my safety." The colonel studied her for a long moment, processing implications that extended far beyond a single mission. Finally, he did something that would be remembered by everyone present. He came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute, not the casual acknowledgement between officers, but the formal gesture reserved for proven warriors and exceptional service. The salute held for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for everyone on the flight line to understand its significance. As the colonel lowered his hand, other personnel began following suit. Pilots who'd dismissed her, ground crew who'd doubted her, maintenance staff who'd seen her as just another pilot, all rendering the respect that had been 18 months in the making. Sarah returned the salute with military precision, but her eyes carried something new. The doubt that had shadowed her for a year and a half was gone, replaced by quiet confidence that came from crossing lines others wouldn't approach. The legend was already beginning. By evening, pilots throughout the theater would be discussing the Devet Anbar, the attack run that redefined what courage looked like when measured against impossible odds. Sarah walked across the tarmac as sunset painted the desert sky in shades of amber and gold. Behind her, her battle-scarred A-10 sat surrounded by maintenance equipment, ground crew examining damage that told the story of impossible courage made manifest. In her hand, she carried the silver patch that had been ripped from her flight suit during the dive, a small piece of fabric that would never again carry the stigma of being backup. From this moment forward, it would represent something entirely different. The distant figures of 8 SEALs appeared on the horizon, moving in formation toward her position. As they approached, Sarah could see Martinez at their head, his face bearing the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions had been shattered and rebuilt in the space of a single mission. They stopped 20 feet away, and without discussion or command, came to attention in perfect synchronization. 8 battle-hardened warriors rendering respect to the pilot who descended below safe altitude when no one else would. Sarah nodded once, the gesture carrying acknowledgement and understanding. No words were necessary. In the brotherhood of arms, some acts speak with such clarity that explanation becomes redundant. As the SEALs departed, Martinez caught her eye one final time. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology, and a debt I'll never be able to repay." "No debt, Sergeant. Just do your job and let me do mine." He smiled, understanding passing between them like electricity. Roger that, Angel. The nickname would stick. Not ground hugger or backup pilot, but Angel, the warrior who descended from heaven when hell was the only alternative. Over the following weeks, the story evolved in the way military legends always do. Details became sharper, stakes became higher, impossibility became more impossible. But the core truth remained unchanged. When regulations said it couldn't be done, and safety protocols declared it suicidal, someone had chosen to dive anyway. New pilots arriving at the base would hear whispered versions of the story during their orientation briefings. Not from instructors, those remained professionally circumspect, but from crew chiefs, maintenance personnel, and other pilots who'd witnessed the aftermath. "See that A-10 with the patched bullet holes? That's Collins's bird. She took it below 200 feet in contested airspace and came home with more battle damage than most aircraft survive." What was the mission? 8 SEALs surrounded by enemy forces. Every other pilot said the target area was too dangerous. She went in anyway. The story became a benchmark for courage under fire, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only choice worth making. Flight instructors wouldn't officially endorse diving below safe altitude, but they'd ask theoretical questions about decision-making under extreme circumstances. If American lives depended on your willingness to break safety protocols, how would you calculate acceptable risk? The answers varied, but the lesson was consistent. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the willingness to act despite fear, when action was the only alternative to tragedy. 6 months later, Sarah received orders transferring her to the Air Force Weapons School as an instructor pilot. The assignment came with a promotion to captain and a citation that carefully avoided operational details while acknowledging exceptional courage under fire during close air support operations. On her final evening at the base, Sarah stood alone beside her A-10, running her hand along wings that had carried her through fire and brought her home transformed. The aircraft would remain here, assigned to her replacement, but carrying scars that told the story of one perfect moment when preparation met opportunity at exactly the right altitude. A young lieutenant approached hesitantly, newly assigned to the squadron and obviously wrestling with questions about reputation and reality. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? The story about your dive, is it true?" Sarah looked at the young pilot, seeing herself 18 months earlier, eager, uncertain, carrying the weight of others' expectations and her own doubt. "Lieutenant, what's your name?" "Williams, ma'am, just graduated flight school." "Williams, let me give you some advice. Train hard, follow regulations, master your aircraft, but understand that someday you might face a choice between doing what's safe and doing what's right. When that moment comes, remember that courage isn't about not being scared." "What's it about, ma'am?" Sarah smiled, touching the silver patch now permanently sewn onto her flight suit. "It's about flying below safe altitude when everyone else stays above. Courage isn't about avoiding fear. It's about flying below safe altitude when everyone else chooses to stay above." If this story moved you, honor her courage. Subscribe and join our family of quiet heroes. And tell me, have you ever dropped below your own safe altitude in life just to prove you could do what others said was impossible?